Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session, the latest in our Health Safety Digital webinar series. And please accept our apologies for the slight delay. All the best preparation in the world can never solve last-minute technical difficulties, but we are up and running now. I'm very happy to be bringing this session for you today. So just before we introduce today's panel, a little bit of information about what you're going to be hearing about today. So in your organization, you're very likely to be collecting all sorts of safety data: accidents, hazard spots, audit outcomes, corrective actions, risk scores, the list goes on and on. But SIFs still occur, and all too often risks remain invisible until something goes badly wrong. So today, in partnership with Notify Technology, we're going to be exploring how modern health and safety leaders can move from reactive reporting of lagging indicators to proactive risk reduction. And we'll be considering how leading safety practitioners gather the right data and turn it into meaningful, actionable intelligence. Before we jump in, just a short bit of housekeeping from myself. Please do feel free to engage with our panel using the chat and the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. If this is your first time using Crowdcast, then it's very intuitive and it's very simple to use. But if you're familiar with the platform, then please do feel to engage with us. And we've set some time aside at the end of today's session to go through your questions. And one last thing from me, if you've not registered yet for the health and safety event at the NEC Birmingham in April, please do feel free to secure your free pass today. We'll put a registration link into that chat, so we'd love to see as many of you there as possible to continue having conversations just like this one. So, as you can see, we've got an expert panel lined up today, and I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves one by one because they can do a far better job of that than I can. So, starting with Robin, if you could introduce yourself to today.
Hi, I'm Robin Dearden. I'm head of quality and ESG for Menzies Distribution Solutions. So we're a large UK-based third-party logistics provider. We work for a range of customers from food manufacturing to packaging and industrial and defence products.
Brilliant stuff. We're going to carry on going clockwise around the circle. So, Alex, when it comes to you next.
Sorry, it just went all gobbled there for a second. I'm Alex Nichol. I'm head of product at Notify Technology, so AHS software company. My background is actually in software design. I've been building software for like the last 20 odd years. And the last 9 of those have been spent building mostly safety software in high risk industries like construction, rail infrastructure.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks, Alex. Liam, we're going to come to you next.
Thanks, Mark. I must pick you up on how simple Crowdcast is to use because my technical difficulties before this call wasn't saying it's simple.
You're going to be the test case for all of our sessions moving forward, Liam.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Liam Simpson. I'm the HSEQ director for Premier Technical Services Group, and we service quite a lot of the large retailers across the UK, and we're also operational as well in the Netherlands.
Brilliant stuff, Liam. And finally, coming on to Duncan.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. Yeah, Duncan Davies. I'm the founder and CEO at Notify Technology. So delighted to be here today and looking forward to a good session. By background, I'm an accountant, a recovering accountant, but my passion is in technology and what that can do in the workplace. So Notify, we're about creating a safety revolution. As Mark said at the top of the introductions, people are still getting killed at work in 2026 in the UK, which is crazy when you think about how much that we can do. So that's our little revolution and our mission at Notify that we're trying to follow up. And looking forward to this session. And I'm on the naughty step with Liam for Crowdcast too. So we'll own that.
I really like that you guys are taking responsibility. It's almost certainly the shared blame, I think, to go around for all of us there. But we'll address that another time. Brilliant. Thanks to you all for joining us today, and thank you for bearing with us through the slight difficulties just now. I'm going to go through some questions with all of you, and it's very much a chance for all of you to kind of jump in. So I'll kind of steer you in one direction in terms of who can maybe answer first, but then do all feel free to jump in. The first thing I'd like to get into is around proactive risk reduction. So which types of data or insight do you think have had the biggest impact in your experience, and why? And Robin, I'd like to go to you first with this.
Yeah, I'm going to be almost a little bit deliberately vague with the first part of my answer, that it really is everything and anything. And I think this will vary a lot from organisation to organisation, depending on where you are on your journey, what it is you do, what sector you're in, that sort of thing. But I'm going to state some real obvious ones. I think hazard and near misses, they're the key ones to get involved, to get good data around. For us, we've learned a lot over the last year or two around observations, particularly positive observations. They're the real key things of getting engagement. That's got to be backed up with the power of thank you for reporting that, for engaging that, for making observations. Audits and monitoring, really powerful, and we've had a lot of success in increasing the amount of audits we do, the types of audits we do, not just to get data but get engagement as well. It gives a chance to have a conversation with people about what's going on in their area, get more insight and that sort of thing. We've also seen a good negative correlation sometimes of when audits, inspections, monitoring haven't been done well, accidents happen. So we know the inverse is true on that as well. And then also action tracking. So actually looking at actions that we're creating. Are they good? Are they being worked on? Are they actually being closed down? That's just important as identifying it. And then finally, I know this isn't proactive, but don't forget your accident data. Don't forget the outcomes. It's lagging, but it's still there. It still needs to be learned from and worked with if you want to improve.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go.
Mark. Yeah, please do.
I think from us and looking at it from a proactive space, I think one of the biggest shifts sort of I've seen in recent years with organisations is just a little bit like Robin around near misses, but in terms of realising that actually injury data just sitting there on its own really tells us very little. And if we want to be proactive and start to look, we need to think, how do we start to look much earlier in that chain? And I think a few areas for me that sort of give us the greatest insight, and typically I've shared this with Duncan in the past in terms of free learning events. We look at them as the near misses, unsafe conditions and observations, and how do we pick them up early within that process? I think on that space, it's not just around counting them as well. A lot of organisations love the volume of near misses, but for me, the real value in that is where's the quality, what's the narrative, and how do we build the context behind it? That really then helps us to understand the pressures that our colleagues and the workforce are going to be under. Is there equipment issues? But it also helps us then really start to build that picture. And then that's where patterns emerge. And if we can be more proactive in that space and understand that from as early as possible, that gets us to move the dial a lot more. I think the second area for me is obviously the exposure to risk. Many organisations, typically like where I am as well, we're carrying out and dealing activities with generally inherent risk. So working at high lifting operations, confined spaces, all those typical risk areas that we foresee across many organisations. So we start to understand the scale of that exposure, how many hours we're working at high, how many miles we've driven during the week, and being able to combine that data gives us a much richer picture in terms of what that risk exposure looks like. And I think then lastly for me is around how do we have them authentic and genuine conversations and engagement with the workforce. I think that's some of the real value that I've gained in my time over the last few years. Instead of just reporting or having a dashboard, how do we have them conversations on site? How do we understand from the workforce what is the real risk that they're facing, and how can we, as safety professionals or as leaders, how do we impact that more proactively rather than it being reactive?
Duncan or Alex, love to give you a chance to jump in.
I mean, I think I probably slightly counter to what people expect from a technology person, but I also think insight from being out and about, it's and I feel this particularly in the line of business we're in, because we're often not out and about because we're in software. But I speak to people like Liam and Robin, and one of the things I admire in safety people, and it's one of the hardest bits of the job, is they're out and about all the time, because actually I think you get a lot of insight just watching and being present and seeing things. And I think that's sometimes overlooked, particularly in perhaps other professions. And I see a lot in more progressive businesses where their safety people are out and about and engaging, and where the work is happening, not necessarily at a desktop looking at the data, and actually flipping that to the technology, having that data with you wherever you are. So mobile is really valuable. But also, I think where I see technology helping is then giving people the time back so that they feel like they can go and do the trips to see these sites all over the country. And I know Robin's got sites all over the place, so you can't possibly hope to see everybody at every site. But I think what technology helps you build is that ability and efficiency to have that time back to go and be present and spot things, like the experience that safety professionals have that we know, where they can go and very quickly understand how safe a site is going to be just by how people behave and walk around and act. I think that's something we shouldn't overlook when we talk about the data and the insight part.
Definitely. I have I have lots of conversations with people around that, and actually that's what they're quite thankful for, is like the time that they get to actually have conversations. That's I think everything that the guys have already said pretty much sums it up. I think the one thing that I would add to that as well is just the who is doing the reporting as well is quite a key one. I think a lot of businesses that I talk to that have quite a strong safety culture, they tend to pay attention to who's taking part in that process as well, like who's doing the reporting. If it's all done by the health and safety team, then that's not such a good sign. They want to see a good mix of people around the business getting involved in that as well.
Good stuff, and thanks, Alex, for being so patient and us making you go at the end of the line there. I promise you'll get a chance to go first further down. So moving on, I think many organisations collect a lot of safety data but struggle to act on it. So where do you most often see that disconnect happen? Liam, if we go to you first, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Two things for me in terms of the disconnect is, first is one around language, and then to my earlier point, really more around context. Us being a safety professional, we're comfortable talking accident frequency rates. We talk around lagging indicators, audits, inspection scores. But I think if we're honest, that language typically doesn't always resonate with operational leaders or operational managers, and their focus is purely on running the business, delivering the projects, making the customers and clients that they're serving happy. So I think the important piece for me is how do we develop that common language, whether that's it, and that common.
Oh, we've got to leave.
The Crowdcast North.
How do we then?
Just got bigger. Liam, you're back in. You're still good. Do you want to just go through that again?
From the start?
From the start, yeah. Let's go from the start. I'll ask the question again. Many organisations collect a lot of safety data but struggle to act on it. So where do you most often see that disconnect take place?
Yeah, I think two things for me is language and context. I said context earlier, but I think again that's important. As safety professionals, we're quite comfortable with talking around frequency rates, lagging indicators, inspections, audit scores, etc. But I think if we're trying to, if we're honest, I think from an operational perspective, if we all start to speak that language, sometimes it doesn't really resonate. So I think how do we find that common language, throughout the organisation is really important. I think once we've got that, then we can translate that into, actionable insights. And if we stop just presenting metrics, but add the value to it and the storytelling that goes behind it, I think that's when it really becomes valuable to the operational leaders, right? And then that's when they're able to then start spotting them trends, and then they're able to intervene as early as possible. And then I said around the context piece and around how organization, I think someone mentioned it earlier around, at the moment we're collecting a lot of data, whether that's HR related data, whether it's IT related data. But I think, which, and isn't a bad thing, right? But I think it's around what can we do with that data? How do we present it to get meaningful outcome from it? How do we interpretate that data and understand it across the organisation so that we're all on the same page, we're all well aligned with what's important around that context. And I think if we, from my point of view as safety professionals, if we can really start to draw out that storytelling behind the data, what trends we're starting to see, what are these emerging risks, that's when we start to become on the front foot rather than being reactive.
Robin, where do you see the most disconnect between gathering that safety data but then not acting on it?
Yeah, I think some real common threads to what Liam was saying. We're a very operational led business, as you expect with logistics. So our operational teams, our operational leaders, a lot of pressure on them, and they've got a lot of plates spinning all the time, and safety is only one of those plates. So it's about cutting through to the data that they really need, and sometimes, I think so what Liam was saying, too much data can be too much. Sometimes less is more, focusing on certain aspects, focusing on certain trends, and really drawing out what's important. I think, as Liam mentioned in the earlier point, one of the challenges I think for sort of acting on data is how, what data we're looking at, or what data we're collecting and how we're going about that. So, chasing lots and lots of observations, but they're not quality observations. There's nothing good behind those. So it's are we leading ourselves down a path and not getting the great data because we're chasing a number rather than what's in there? And then similar about the language and about actually sort of cutting through what's really important. And this is something we're going to start doing some more work on in our business around what are those SIF events, those sort of serious incident, fatality, potential events that really need to be pulled out of from the noise of everything else that's there. And actually getting more focus on that. So we're being really clear about what's going on with them.
Alex, I'm going to come to you next. Have you got any ideas around this?
I think mine will be languages as well, just from a slightly different perspective, I think. So more the inconsistency in language and nomenclature that people use. Like we see that quite a bit, especially in big companies, so big businesses with lots of different sites, multiple business units, different locations managed by different teams. They all use different terms and language to categorize things. So one site will call it manual handling, another one calls it lifting and carrying. You'll get another site that lets people categorize it however they like in a free type field. We get that quite a bit. And then they wonder why they can't see the patterns and the trends in the data then, right? So I think that consistency in the language that you use and how you structure your data is really important. And I think people tend to collect a lot of information thinking that they've got this sort of big data thing, whereas actually it just ends up a big mess and they don't really know what to do with it.
And finally, Duncan.
Yeah, I think mine links back probably through a couple of those threads. And I've seen this trend over the last few years since we started Notify. I remember right at the beginning of Notify, I was very much, it's all going to be about the dashboards. We need to get the data in the dashboards because people love a dashboard. I think what I've also seen is this idea that it's all about the data. It can be at risk of getting a bit overplayed. So I think the way I describe that is a bit like your Victorian trophy hunter that would just go and hunt the animals to put them in a box to show they've got them, and you have to be careful not to just have the data because you've got it. You need to be a bit more David Attenborough with it. You need to care about it. You need to actually understand what you're trying to achieve, and I think that's a key part about when people get overwhelmed with the data or they've got too much and they don't have the data skills. And this is, as Liam knows, is a soapbox of mine on data literacy. We don't teach data literacy. So the expectation that people have is, well, I've got data, it should tell me all the answers. And you kind of need to understand the data's got to be in a good format. It's got to be clean. It's got to be, and it's boring. It really is dull. People want a sexy dashboard, but actually the success of that starts at the boring hygiene of the things are in the right fields, they're in the right formats, etc. So I think that would be my warning or my steer would be, don't have the data because you're supposed to have data. Figure out what you want to do with that data and use it. And as Robin said, take action when you've got the data. Don't let it sit and fester in the corner, which is, I think, the other issue that sometimes arises. So yeah, that's my part of it.
No, absolutely. And Duncan, I'm going to stay with you as we move on to the next question around how can safety data be used more effectively to influence behaviour rather than just reporting on outcomes?
I mean, I think in many ways, I think one of the if we're talking about data as being something that's digital and quick to get rather than pen and paper. One of my favorite use cases is the fact that you've got the ability to do real time on the job coaching. You can instantly see somebody reporting something, get it through to you, and you can easily therefore pick up the phone or engage with that person in a way that says, look, this is actually what you've reported, that's great, but actually what I'm seeing is this and this, so actually next time have a think about that. So I think that real time on the job coaching is really helpful. And then probably the other bit would just be using it for positive stuff. I see quite a lot of our customers talking about positive observations now, so that the behavior that people have or the thought process they have about safety isn't always just a bad thing happened or it's going to be bad, or more divisively, we can't get on with our jobs because health and safety is stopping us because we've got to do all this stuff. Promoting, the data of the good things that have happened, the time that we've saved being safe, the customers that we've won because we've been safe, that kind of data showing how the safety behaviors have helped influence positive things in the business. I think that's really important. Otherwise, it becomes a compliance conversation, and that's hard to get people excited about, frankly. In businesses that are often pressured to do sales numbers and win customers and all those other things that are competing for attention. So I think those two, on the job coaching and getting to people quickly, and then the positive side of what can be presented in the data.
Alex, how do you think that we can use safety data more effectively to influence behaviours?
Got a slightly different angle on it, actually. We talk a lot about reporting up chain and making sure that everybody in leadership knows what's going on in the business and how to make changes and all of that. But actually, I hear quite a bit about storytelling now in the other direction in order to sort of affect change further downstream. So, I mean, graphs and trend analysis and all of that sort of stuff is great, but it doesn't tend to change behavior on its own. They're just statistics, right? So they don't inspire change. And I think a big part of it is telling real stories about real people in real incidents with real impact that they've got to live with that affect their lives. And I think, if you can tell the story about this terrible thing that happened to John Smith on site A and how it changed his life forever, that can help managers at other sites to picture their own John Smith and kind of imagine that same situation happening to him and what his life would be like with those terrible outcomes. And I think it's that sort of storytelling that it makes people believe that it could happen to them as well, and that's what moves people to act and gets them to bring about change. I think you've got to find a way to bring that data to life, I think, and make it quite deeply personal. And I think good storytelling is a really good way to do that.
Robin, I'm going to come to you next. What's your take?
Yeah, I think common to everyone else. I think there's an element of when sharing data, being very honest about it, and being very sort of candid. Using that well. Don't just tell me something's dangerous. Back it up with the data that sits behind that, so I can understand. I think that the storytelling's sort of brilliant, whether that's within your own industry or people in similar sectors. There's quite a lot of people out there now who will come and share their stories. That can be incredibly powerful. I think that the clarity in how you're communicating that data, if you're trying to influence behaviour, sometimes it might be that, like you said before, less is more, and I find that particularly with senior leaders. Really, really, really to the point. This is the key thing. and try and make it engaging. And some of this is know your audience. And again, if we're talking particularly maybe about sort of senior leaders, my boss is our CEO. He loves a good graph. If I want to do something with our COO, that's probably more conversation and actually talking him through what needs to happen. So yeah, just being really sort of focused on how you're getting it over, but being flexible in what you're doing and quite canny about the story you're telling.
Liam, finally over to you. How do we influence behaviours by using data, safety data?
I think similar to what all the other guys have said as well. But I think for me, this is really around how do we connect the culture piece to data. I think if we can use data in the right way to really support leaders and help how we improve our teams, that's when we really start to shift that mindset and influence the behaviours that we're talking about. The way I think about this, I developed a framework a couple of years ago, and that typically looks at performance, culture, and governance. And traditionally, safety data would normally, would form quite a heavy part of that piece. But I think if we just looking at it from injuries and accidents and incidents, then that's already happened, right? So I think, like the other guys were saying earlier, if we can identify those elements in advance and then how we shift that helps shift that behavior, that's when we really start to turn the dial. That's when we start to move from, I think Duncan mentioned around the compliance state. If we just remain in compliance state all the time, that is when evidently you're going to get people being rushed, equipment not being used correctly, etc. And if we move it to the care aspect and we're engaging, we're having authentic conversations, which you spoke about earlier, that's when we start to really learn what's going on out there with our workforce, and that's how we can then start to adapt and we can influence change much more effective, because you're having that human touch. I think we can all get, we're all still obsessed with data, but we have that. We still need to humanize safety. I think you can never replace the human element safety, and that's really important. We keep that at the core as well. So yeah, that's my thought.
Good stuff. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about technology a little bit more. Alex, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What role do you think technology should play in helping teams move from reactive reporting to proactive prevention? And how do you think that impacts risks? How do you think that impacts risk management strategy?
I feel like given what's going on at the moment, I feel like I shouldn't be talking about AI and all the cool stuff that's doing at the moment. But I think the answer is going to be way more boring, because I think it just comes back to the standardization thing. I think when I've worked with so many businesses now and watched them go through that transition between sort of paper to homebrew digital to something a bit more sophisticated. And I think the biggest impact that I've seen is that standardization and control of the data that goes in, controlling the quality of it, making sure things that are labeled and categorized correctly so that you can see those patterns, you can see the trends, you can make the predictions, that the AI models then can do much better work with whatever data is there under the hood. I think if everybody uses different language to categorize things, if everybody's singing from a different hymn sheet, it makes it impossible to see all of that stuff. So it means that it doesn't matter how much data you've got, it's of no value at that point. So I see that as the biggest impact. I think technology the right technology as well can help you to steer you in the right direction, put guardrails around that, make sure that things are captured in the right way, that you've got a bare minimum of data that you need to be able to act. And I think once you've got that, it allows you to do like-for-like comparisons, for instance, which then lets you to spot. It allows you to spot when things are adrift, I think. And that's when you start to see patterns that are systemic rather than localized and all of that. And that's where that has a big impact on strategy, right?
Duncan, how do you think we can use technology to move to reaction to more proactive prevention?
Well, I think firstly, I guess, and I think we all agree on this call, to Liam's point, it's a human game. I think what I really love about health and safety is it's almost all human, and then risk is numbers. So you've got this sort of regular moving between the domain of needing to, look at behavior and how humans work, and then almost what is a natural place for technology, which is scoring risk, evaluating and measuring risk. And I think it's important that we recognize that the technology provides tools. So really what we're doing is tooling up to do something that is effective. I think the first thing for that is just engagement. So if your workforce are out and about at sites, on construction sites, on lorries, where you can't really keep a good, healthy eye on them and keep them safe, then technology can be a massive bridge between where they are and where you are. And I always love this idea of the ivory tower. The people who end up getting fined and going to prison are in an ivory tower. We might not want to call it that, but they're a long, long way from where the real work is happening. And I think technology and the tools that it brings is a fabulous enabler for someone to get ambiguous signals from the coalface, for want of a better phrase, to those people. And that's the opportunity for me to move from reactive to proactive, because it allows somebody to say, I'm worried. It allows someone to say, I'm seeing a hazard over there. I think there might be an issue. And technology, unlike pen and paper or older methods, allows you to go around that loop much more quickly to hopefully get to a place where you're impacting that, you're intervening more quickly, and then you're not having the accident. And I think that for me, that engagement, which drives data, which gets used to mitigate risk, is a perfect cycle of how it should work, with humans at the front and then the technology supporting the engagement. So for me, that's the key part of it, is how do you get them engaged? And that might be an app. It might be cameras, it might be sensors. We'll get into a whole debate about privacy and things like that. But for me, that's a key part of it, is letting you hear what's going on the front line in a position of power.
Liam, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah, there's a couple of great points. I think Alex mentioned it around localizing and making sure that we can benchmark. And we've had, in the past, we've had conversations with Duncan around how could we look at all the data and then benchmark it to not just make my organization safer, but collectively as a profession, how do we really impact change positively with the data? So that was, I think, the really good point that's brought out by Alex. But I think my perspective on this is that there's a couple of bits in terms of, I think technology plays a really, really important role, but I think it's important to say that it doesn't just necessarily primarily make organizations safer. I think good leadership, good conversations, strong operational understanding, that will always, for me, as I said, humanize it. It sits at sort of the coal face, to pinch Duncan's word there, at safety. But I think technology should help support them aspects as well. Many organizations still, historically and even now, look at safety information on spreadsheets, emails, or individual reports. So I think, if that data remains localized in silos, it becomes really difficult to see these emerging patterns where we want to try and get on the front foot. I think that what technology can bring is, how do we bring that information together? How do we create consistency? We've got organizations consistently growing, and with that becomes, a lot of complexity as well. So if we can help place the data in a centralized location, we've got access to that data, it's well structured, like, we were saying earlier, I think that really puts us in a meaningful place where we can act upon it with good outcomes. And I think, a well implemented digital system can really help, move us forward much quicker than how we've done it traditionally. And, I think, but the other bit aside from, platforms that we're looking at, if you like, or talking around, is that I see a much wider and broader opportunity for the safety professional. I think if we use technology well, it shifts us, it shifts our profession from being looked at then to drive compliance or just compile a report, to being much more proactive, strategic in the approach as well. So we can more, I'm a firm believer that we can use it to elevate the profession, but also we need to get organizations in the mindset that safety is not just a cost function, it can be an enabler as well. So how do we improve productivity? How do we improve efficiency across the organization, not just in safety, but in other functions as well, that can really, move the organization forward.
And finally, Robin, what role do you think technology can play in helping make that shift from reactive reporting to proactive prevention?
I think it's for us, certainly one thing that's been key is just making that whole process faster, easier, and more open and accessible. That's what technology's done for us, and that's everything what Duncan says. Use of apps, that sort of thing, but also actually being quite robust in what you're asking for in your reporting system. So we took ours from being really complicated forms for observations and that sort of thing to really stripped down and simple. So make it easy, make it fast, allow it to be anonymous if that works for your organisation. We did. One thing we've done as well is cast our net a little bit wider with access to some of our technology in terms of bringing customers into it. So we operate on a lot of customer sites. We have customers based on some of our sites and planning on some of our sites, giving them access to it. So it's all coming into one place, allowing contractors who are working on sites to sort of feed into those systems as well. So you're really spreading that net wider. You're getting more and more engagement. You've got something that's easy enough for the cleaner all the way up to the CEO to use it easily, quickly, and really get that engagement and get it being something that's normal to engage with technology and use it. So it becomes just the way we do things.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Okay, I have one more question left, but I just want to give our audience a quick reminder that if you do have questions to get in for our panel, then please do feel free to get them in the next couple of minutes, and we will spend some time at the end going through those. So the last kind of question I have, and Robin, I'm going to come to you first here, is what have you learned about presenting safety insights in a way that drives decisions rather than denial or defensiveness?
Stick to the facts, back it up with data, so use the data, obviously in the right way for the audience, as we've talked about. So both in this business and in a previous business, we've made some significant changes to PPE, and when landing that with the workers who are going to have to fall in with those new rules, actually been really clear with them about what the data's told us. And actually, in a couple of those occasions, what I thought was going to be quite challenging conversations with unions and that sort of thing, were then really easy, because there was the data was so clear. They were like, yeah, we've got to buy into that. And then context and culture. It's got to be used within a just culture. So no finger pointing, no blame, take the emotion out of it. Just be curious. Be curious about what the data's telling you. And probably the final thing, lesson I maybe learned a few years ago was data. We all use ratios. We all use accident frequency rates, accident rates. Sometimes things get lost in that. And I can remember in a past business presenting, some really good year-on-year improvements in accident frequency rate. We're all patting ourselves on the back of that. Hit the targets. It was going in the right way. And an engineer just sat there and went, so that still meant we hurt 16 people that badly last year. They had to take a day off work. And actually cutting through the ratios and things like that sometimes we need to use, but sometimes we hide behind, and get into the facts that go, actually, yeah, that's the really significant story here. Not that the ratios improved, that actually we're still not as good as we want to be. So we need to try even harder.
Yeah, that's good. That's cuts through, I think, that message, doesn't it? Liam, how do we present safety insights in a way that kind of improves things rather than causes friction?
Yeah, I think just want to second what Robin said then is around, I said earlier around accident frequency rates, but actually, and I talked earlier around humanizing the data, what real harm have we caused to people in our organizations? Does that mean, we've reduced an accident frequency rate, great, give ourselves a pat on the back. But actually, would you be comfortable if, your brother, your family friend came home from work and had been injured in the workplace? we all talk around wanting to be, go home safe, but I always think we need to be going home safer than what we actually turned up to work. That's where we want to be aiming for. So I think that's really important. We don't forget, we can't forget that. Robin talked around simplicity earlier. I think absolutely we've got to have data that we've got to follow the facts in terms of what the data is telling us, but we've got to really simplify it as well, because certainly if we're trying to present that data to stakeholders and operational leaders, what's that data really telling us? Because otherwise, you can go into a room and the conversation can be quickly shut down, and the door be firmly closed. We want to have that open conversation, and we want to stick to the facts, keep it simple, so we've got that common language, and just let's stick to the risks. We don't want to, Robin said it around, just culture. So we, that's absolutely the narrative, is that if it's a free learning event, fantastic. How do we learn from these incidences? And we certainly don't want to be pointing blame. So it's really important to focus on the risk rather than on the failure. And also it's around, going back to what Alex said earlier around the storytelling. If we can really emphasize that storytelling piece, and bring people on that journey in terms of what the data looks like. Yes, all organizations are striving for year-on-year improvement in their safety performance, right? I think everyone would want that. But, in some cases that might not be the case, but also there may be a good reason to as well, because they may have grown, there may have been, developments within the organization, or things that we've got to deal with globally on a local level. There's lots of things that are contributory factors why that data might revert to a negative than a positive, and being able to have the storytelling behind it, and having that common language, I think is really important.
Alex, anything to add from your side?
Not a massive amount. I mean, basically what Robin and Liam have just said, really. I think the one thing that I would say, which is probably true for any kind of reporting or decision making, not just in safety, really, is to start with the decision that you want to be made rather than the data that you've got. I think if you walk into a room with 10 different charts, you're going to get 10 different arguments. So actually, it's just going in with one clear ask and just saying, right, I need some budget to fix some stuff so that we can stop this stuff from happening. And here's the data that backs that up. Then, if you're going to get a decision. Then if you're just presenting data for data's sake, then, you're just going to get opinions.
And Duncan, I'll give you the chance to chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been mostly said. I think building on, I think Liam talked about this, that really this is a bit about storytelling and leadership, really. That's the other side of my data literacy comment earlier, which is you can present me with a set of data and tell me what it tells you, and I can probably convince you it tells me something else. I mean, that is the nature of statistics. That's why I think these chaps are saying your accident frequency rate may not tell you enough. And I'm a massive believer in that. And hence my concern about people going, well, we've got the data, because the data is up to interpretation. And I think the skill of safety professionals, when they get data literate, is as Liam said, they're leading the conversation then. And it doesn't have to be data. It doesn't have to be safety. It can be, we've got an operational problem over here, which is leading to an unsafe condition. But actually, by fixing this problem, we will be more efficient, we'll be more productive, we'll deliver better service. I think there's such an opportunity in safety to use the data that you get in your day-to-day safety role that actually moves way beyond compliance. It moves towards, we've seen stuff that's happening on the front line that can help the business deliver better service or deliver it more quickly or more safely. And I think that's a massive opportunity. So I think framing is probably my summary of that, of being able to frame the argument, a bit like Alex said, of there's data here and there's some stuff I can tell you, but this is what I believe. And I talk to lots of really capable safety people who build up that trust in their colleagues over a period of time. So the CEO trusts them, the COO trusts them, the CFO doesn't think they just want to spend money willy-nilly. And if you build that trust up, you get the chance to go in with that safety insight and say, this tells me we need to do this. and everybody's nodding instead of going, yeah, but what about that? And maybe that data's wrong. And then you've kind of already lost, I think. So framing is really, I think, a key skill, and seen some really good examples of that, including in this room. So yeah, that would be my ad.
Good stuff. Very good stuff. Okay, thank you guys for going through all of those questions with me. I'm very pleased to say we do have some questions that have come in from our audience. So what I'll do is I'll read the, I think we've probably got time for about 2 or 3. I'll read the first one out, and then anyone who wants to kind of jump on and give it a stab, then please do feel free to. So this first question has come in from David, who has asked, how can we motivate teams to capture more safety data? And are there any examples of things that have worked for you guys in the past? And I'll let you fight amongst yourselves to see who wants to go first.
I'm going to defer to the professionals.
Yeah, I'll go on that one. I think one of the things we introduced when we was a partner with Notify was around the safety engagements. And to what Robin said earlier, I think you can introduce any platform that you want within organisations, but it's got to be simple to use. Many organisations have got many platforms. So I think, how do we introduce a platform? How do we make it accessible? How do we make it simple, user-friendly for the end user? And then how do we encourage, that free learning event to understand how they're going to get something out of it at the back of it? So I think that's an important cycle to understand if we're developing or we're wanting to encourage, and motivate people to engage with platforms. But I think another really important piece is around feeding back. So yes, we can report in to a system, we can understand the data, but then if I'm an end user and I don't get any feedback from it, then over a period of time, I feel like we'll disengage with that platform. So I think they're from my perspective, I think that's how we can really, get buy-in, not just from the coalface, but also from senior leaders as well. It's really important that if we are reporting into the system, understanding what we're doing with the data, how we're acting upon it, to get real tangible outcomes that can influence change at the back end. But the feedback loop's probably number one for me.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely everything Liam said. Make it simple, say thank you, give feedback, and give all those opportunities, and then like anything, celebrate that success. Celebrate when it's gone well, when we've got more good data in there, when we're getting better data in, when we are getting safer as business. So celebrate, make it simple. Feedback, celebrate success.
Yeah, we hear that time and time again with customers. It's always the big thing that comes up is like, make it easy, make it quick, make it get out of their way, because these people have got other things to do. And actually, if it takes too long to do it, they just won't.
I got just one for Robin and Liam on that topic then, because celebrating it. Where do you draw the line in rewarding people and going, right, we want 10 near misses a month from everybody? Like, how do you walk that line in your worlds of motivating by saying we want to see loads, and then perhaps regretting it when you get 10 the same? Where do you sit on that debate?
I think it depends around, depends where organisations sit within maturity and development of their, in terms of safety maturity. I've kind of been full circle a couple of times on this conversation, is that, back in my early days, you would encourage people to report 2 or 3, near misses a month, or you need to go and complete 4 or 5 inspections a month, etc. I think from my perspective, I think we've got to I think you mentioned it earlier, Duncan, around trust and confidence. So we've got to build that trust and confidence, within safety teams, but also within the operation as well, that we're not just going to force things upon them, because if we're trying to do that and we're trying to be dictators, then it's not going to typically work. And then again, around sort of rewarding that success, a lot of organisations, and we do it as well, in terms of seeing quality reports and how has them quality reports impacted something, and if it has impacted something, how we're going to celebrate that success. So somebody may get, a voucher at the end of the month, for example, but not to say that all other reports wasn't valuable as well. So I think it's important that while we might celebrate, one or two individuals a month because it actually made us change something immediately, it's important to also feed back, because that's how you create that consistency and and that confidence within the platform that actually, if we're doing something, if we continue doing this, we're going to get to here. And it shouldn't be a marathon. It's it's not a sprint. It's always a marathon. So we've just got to play that. Bring them on the journey.
Cool.
Yeah, I think exactly that. We do exactly the same. We recognise not necessarily every month. There's probably something every week we're communicating in the CEO's newsletter or the COO's newsletter about people who've been recognised for that. So telling people why they've been recognised and what they did, and often that is as a result of identifying an issue and helping deal with it. But then also celebrating amongst peer groups. So when a site has been particularly successful, not singling out anyone, just so you've all done this. And there'll be someone in that site that's done a lot, and there'll be someone that's done not so much. And one of the other things we're working on this year is looking at the amount of people that engage with the system.
Yeah.
So you're looking at observations, but by unique users. So we're focusing more on the engagement with the system rather than the number of observations, because we're reasonably confident that if we push the number of unique users engaging with the system up, then we're going to see that the observations come up and the quality of the observations come up. So actually looking at some of the other parameters behind that within the system environment.
Cool.
Good stuff. And we've got time for one more question, and I think it's a good one. It might be a bit of a tricky one to answer. Andrea has asked, how do you influence the use of IT reporting and recording systems when you have an aging workforce that are scared and are resistant to change? So there's a nice little grenade to end the session on. Who fancies that one?
I'll have a go, because we're exactly that. We're a logistics firm, so you've probably all heard of the issues we have as a nation with recruiting lorry drivers. I think the average age of one of our truck drivers is well into their 50s, and he's only getting older. I think without wanting to repeat what we've said a lot before, make it simple, make it easy. Give several routes into that reporting. So whether that's an app that they can use or a QR code they can scan if they don't want to download an app onto their own device or something like that. We haven't quite nailed down yet, but getting the tool onto some of the tech that they use day in, day out. So all of our drivers will have a tablet in the vehicle that's got their manifest, they do their previous checks on it, all that sort of thing. So getting the systems linked here, so everything's in one place. It's on a device that they're comfortable to use, but also then being a bit human about it, spending time with them and with people to sort of explain how to use it, how to log on, and being kind and being human in that approach, and being a bit sensitive in terms of how you do that, how you coach people through that. And you know what? If the ultimate backup still needs to be a bit of paper, make that available. That there's a bit of paper that Robin could fill in and hand to Liam, and he'll log it on the system for me. So having that backup and not being absolutely reliant on an app or a QR code or logging onto a system.
Yeah, flexibility is the key. Has anyone got anything different from that?
I just think that my experience of aging workforce is that they are quite loving their iPads and their apps and their, my elderly relatives who've got grandchildren, you can get them on an iPad easily with some pictures of the kids. So I think, like Robin says, touch and feel and take away the barrier if it's not that scary just because the kids are talking about it. I appreciate resistance to change comes from years of doing things in the same way, and it is hard. I really like Robin's thing of kindness. That needs to pervade more workplaces, of recognizing we've got all sorts of recognition now of how people think and act, and recognizing that people are different is probably the key as well, isn't it, to all change, not just technology change. But yeah, I think plenty of older workers that I know are are all over the tech and AI, causing chaos.
Absolutely. I think, just to echo them as well, I think understanding the how and the why, isn't it, is important. You just mentioned it there, Duncan. A lot of the aging workforce probably got more apps on their devices than what we've got, because, they just generally have. And, as long as they know how to use it, and not we're just sending things on email and say, scan this QR code, you need to do X, Y, and Z, but then delivering the why with it, I think is really important.
Yeah. It's a bit of a journey as well for people. So we got to make sure within technology that we cater for that. I had a conversation just this week actually about making sure that we still put in pages in our PDFs, for instance, on risk assessments, so that people can print them up and get wet signatures for people who don't even have these devices. And it is surprisingly common, that happens quite a bit. So we're still thinking about workflows as to how do we take that kind of analog process and make it digital. So as Robin said, somebody else can do that bit for them if it's a real challenge for them. But as Duncan says, from a software design perspective, I actually find it more challenging designing for the younger generation because their expectations are so much higher. And you watch any of these guys out on site, typing with their thumbs at lightning speed, and they just expect everything to just work. And that's way, way harder to design for.
Brilliant stuff. Okay, I think that's probably all we have time for today. I want to give a massive thank you to all of our panelists. I'm sure everyone who was in attendance today can agree that was really, really insightful stuff. And we very much appreciate your expertise, your time, and your perseverance with our technology problems at the start of today's session. So thank you guys for being with us. To Robin, Alex, Liam, and Duncan, huge thanks from us.
Thank you.
Big thanks as well, obviously, to Notify Technologies who have worked with us on today's session. You can hear more from them at the Health and Safety event in Birmingham in April. There is a link in the chat for yourselves in the audience to register to come along to Birmingham and see us and see Notify Technologies in person. So if you enjoyed today's session, please do come and carry on the conversation. Thanks to our audience for giving us your time this afternoon, and we hope to see all of you either in person in April or online at another session soon. Take care, and we will see you soon.